The pain woke me like a whip cracking through my core. It wasn't even 5 in the morning, and I was already doubled over on the bed, drenched in cold sweat. A knot in my stomach forcing out moans I barely recognized as my own. I managed to dial 911, and minutes later, an ambulance rushed me through blaring sirens to the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago. I remember the harsh white light of the hallway, the sharp smell of antiseptic, and the steady beeping of monitors. A young doctor with a steady voice explained that I needed emergency gallbladder surgery. The inflammation was dangerous, and complications were becoming more likely by the minute. My insurance would cover the standard procedure, but it carried higher risks. The recommended surgery, the one that could ensure I'd leave without serious complications, cost $28,000. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called my daughter, Cassandra, my only child, my pride for so many years. She answered, amidst the sound of suitcases and laughter in the background. "Mom, what's wrong now?" she asked, her tone impatient. "I'm in the hospital. I need urgent surgery." My voice broke. "I can't afford the safer procedure." There was a brief silence, followed by an exasperated sigh. "Mom, I can't cancel my trip. Besides, you always make a big deal out of nothing." The line went dead after her quick excuse, and the call's end tone left me alone in the sterile room. I closed my eyes, trying not to shatter, and took a deep breath. It felt like something more than my body was tearing apart. Minutes later, while waiting for the surgeon, I opened my phone out of habit. On Cassandra's latest Instagram story, I saw her smiling face in front of a mirror, holding a sparkling cocktail. The caption cut like a knife. Mom's at it again with her medical drama. Not ruining my vacation this time. Luxury. Life. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the physical pain that stole my breath, but the realization that the person I'd lived and worked for all my life had just turned her back on me without a second glance. I gripped the phone tightly and stared at the ceiling of the observation room, vowing that something inside me had changed forever as the hospital's white lights flickered above and the distant clatter of a metal cart signaled the dawn of a day that would never be the same. The night in observation stretched endlessly. Each beep of the monitor echoed in my head like a clock ticking down my fragility. The antiseptic smell clung to my nostrils, mingling with the sound of distant footsteps and the metallic clank of nursing carts. I tried to shift on the gurney, but the discomfort wasn't just physical. It was the emptiness surrounding me, beside me. An elderly woman with white hair and trembling hands received constant visitors. Her children came with bouquets of flowers, thermoses of homemade soup, and gentle words. They stroked her forehead, calling her mom with warmth. I watched in silence as they laughed and showered her with love, while my phone screen stayed dark. Not a single message or missed call bearing Cassandra's name. I closed my eyes, and memories hit like a soft but precise blow. My life unfolded in flashes. Me, younger, holding Cassandra in my arms as my husband walked out the door, never to return. I swore then that she'd never feel abandoned or want for anything. I worked days at the accounting firm, wrestling with endless paperwork and impatient clients, and nights teaching sewing classes in our living room. I remember my fingers numb from the needle and the weight of exhaustion, while she slept clutching her teddy bear, oblivious to my fatigue, all so she'd never lack. I always knew Cassandra was vain, aloof, a bit selfish. She spent more time in front of the mirror than looking into anyone's eyes, but I told myself she was young. That time would mature her, that my love would teach her to be different. I clung to that hope for years, like someone grasping a plank in the middle of the sea. In that hospital room, Amid beeps and the smell of bleach, something inside me broke. I stopped watching the door. Waiting for her to appear, I stopped making excuses for her. Loneliness wrapped me like a cold blanket, and I realized that night I wasn't just fighting physical pain, but the silent collapse of everything I'd believed about my daughter's love, as a new resolve began to take root within me, stronger than the grief. At dawn, the surgeon entered my room, brow furrowed. He explained that the inflammation was worsening quickly and without surgery soon. The risk of necrosis would spike. His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed the urgency I already felt in every stab of pain in my abdomen. I nodded silently, fear and helplessness burning inside me. When they left me alone, I mustered the strength to call the bank. I explained my situation, the surgery, the cost estimate. After reviewing my account, the voice on the line was as cold as a machine without collateral. They could only approve a third of the needed amount. I hung up slowly, my throat tightening. My next call was more personal. I dialed a distant cousin in Denver, someone I hadn't seen in years. She answered kindly. But the moment I mentioned loan, her tone shifted to excuses. She was in the middle of a home renovation. Her money was tied up. I thanked her politely and hung up before shame could swallow me whole. Desperation pushed me to do something I'd never imagined. I opened a neighborhood group chat on my phone and typed with shaking fingers, "I need help for urgent surgery. I'll pay back every cent. It's a matter of life and death." I hit send and stared at the screen, hoping for a miracle. The miracle came in small notifications. First, a neighbor from the third floor sent $200 with a message of encouragement. Then, a former sewing student contributed $500, one by one. Modest deposits arrived, each carrying a quiet kindness that pierced through the screen. Then a name made me catch my breath. Marjorie, an old co-worker from the accounting firm, now living in Seattle. Her message was brief. "You're not alone. $10,000 transferred. Take care." I covered my mouth and let silent tears fall. Near strangers were holding me up where my own daughter had let me go. In that moment, I knew my life would no longer revolve around the one who'd turned her back on me. And as I counted the deposits one by one, a determination was born that would shape the days to come. The days after surgery were slow and sharp. Every movement reminded me my body was stitching itself back together, with sutures and bruises that ached with each breath. I spent afternoons reclining on the living room couch, a blanket over my legs, the distant hum of the TV on just for company. I forced myself not to check my phone, as if ignoring it could dull the emotional sting still throbbing behind my stomach. But curiosity won out. I opened Instagram, and there was Cassandra, radiant, posing on a yacht's deck against an impossibly blue sea. In another photo, she laughed in a chic restaurant with a glass of rosé, surrounded by candles and warm lights. Blessed, luxury life. The caption read. I swiped through, a mix of sadness and anger settling in my chest. I needed a distraction, so I checked our joint savings account, where my mother's inheritance was kept. I'd always seen that fund as a lifeline for emergencies, and during the worst moments of surgery, it was my comfort knowing it was there. I logged in, and when I saw the recent transactions, my heart stopped. There was a withdrawal of $85,000 made just days before Cassandra left for Miami. I stared at the number, willing it to be a mistake. But it wasn't. She'd done it. Her abandonment in the hospital had been a blow. But this was different. Not only had she left me alone among tubes and monitors, but she'd also taken the only thing that gave me security, my mother's legacy. The fruit of a lifetime of family effort. I stood slowly, careful not to strain the scar, and went to the kitchen. I filled a glass of water, held it firmly, and, staring at my reflection in the window, whispered, "I'm not going to cry. I'm going to act." That thought stayed with me as I began planning my next step. I started documenting everything with a precision I'd never applied outside my work. Every bank transaction, every suspicious withdrawal, every screenshot of Cassandra's yacht and restaurant stories. I saved them in folders with dates and notes. I even photographed the cold messages she sent me. Her words, like those of a stranger, curt, loveless, without a hint of remorse. It was strange to feel so methodical amid such disappointment. Each saved file was a pang of pain, but also a brick in the wall of resolve I was building. I knew that to face what was coming. Anger alone wouldn't suffice. I needed evidence, order, and cold blood. A neighbor, hearing of my situation while bringing me fresh-baked bread, recommended a trusted lawyer. Mr. Harold, she said with respect. He was an older man, a specialist in inheritance and breach of trust cases. I visited him 2 days later. Still walking slowly from the surgical wound, Harold welcomed me in a small office smelling of wood and old books. He listened to my story without interrupting, flipping through the documents I handed him and studying each screenshot carefully. When I finished, he looked up and nodded slowly. "If you want justice, ma'am, you'll have it," he said with a calm that gave me confidence. "But brace yourself. This will hurt more before it heals." I left his office with an odd sensation, as if a heavy weight had shifted elsewhere in my body that night. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. It wasn't happiness or relief, but a certainty I was no longer improvising. I had a plan. Silence settled in my home like an ally. No shouting, no phone arguments, no pleas. Just the calm before the storm I'd chosen to unleash. As I mentally prepared for the next step, I felt the fearful woman who'd entered the hospital fading, giving way to someone ready to face what came next. Harold didn't waste time. Once he had all the documentation, he filed a lawsuit for misappropriation and requested a preemptive freeze on all of Cassandra's accounts. He explained that, with clear evidence of the withdrawals and their use for personal gain, the judge could authorize protective measures without notifying her first. Hearing this gave me an odd feeling, not joy, but a mix of justice and a deep fatigue turning into resolve. While the legal gears turned, Cassandra's life continued in her glass bubble. Her Instagram stories showcased her personal theater champagne breakfasts, boat rides, and shopping sprees in Miami's South Beach. One afternoon, she posted a video opening a designer bag, smiling at the camera as if the world were hers. I watched in silence, no longer angry, just noting every detail that confirmed my blind love for her had turned into a cutting calm. The blow came days later. Cassandra was dining at Miami's priciest restaurant, surrounded by friends and the boyfriend celebrating his birthday. According to a friend's later post, the scene was cinematic. Her card was declined once, twice, 3 times. The waiters stood with forced patience as the table's laughter died. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was her. First a text, then a call, then another. Her name flashed on the screen repeatedly. I took a deep breath, recalling the hospital nights and the silence she'd given me when I needed her most. I pressed decline without hesitation. That afternoon, the shiny, fragile world Cassandra had built began to crack, and as my phone's buzz echoed on the table, I knew what was coming wasn't just a financial reckoning, but the start of the true fall she'd brought upon herself. The shouting reached me before her shadow. From my living room, I heard her voice shatter the street's calm. "You ruined my life. Open the door right now." I peered cautiously through the peephole. There was Cassandra, disheveled, eyes red, pounding on the door as if she could knock it down with sheer will. Her voice echoed off the hallway walls, drawing curious neighbors to windows and balconies. I didn't open the door. I walked to it with steady steps, keeping my breath even, and slipped an envelope I'd prepared days earlier through the slot, the court summons. For a moment, there was silence. I saw her hands tremble as she opened it, reading the first lines about misappropriation, protective measures, and fund repayment. Her face shifted from fury to a mix of shock and fear. "You can't do this to me, I'm your daughter," she shouted, her voice more plea than command. I didn't respond. I stood behind the door, leaning against the wood, feeling the weight of her manipulation dissolve for the first time in years. Outside, murmurs grew. Some neighbors were already recording with their phones, and I knew her pride would crumble faster than any savings. That night, as I sipped tea in the kitchen, I opened social media out of habit. The first thing I saw was an anonymous post in a local group. The daughter who left her mom in the hospital to go on vacation is now begging for forgiveness on the street. Attached was a photo from a balcony, showing Cassandra holding the envelope, staring at the ground. I closed my phone without emotion, no hatred or joy. I understood that the fall that began in a Miami restaurant was now spreading to her real world, her neighborhood, the gazes she could no longer meet. As silence filled my home again, I knew the next step was no longer up to me, but to the justice about to arrive. The trial day dawned gray, as if the sky itself chose to mirror the weight of what was to come. I entered the courthouse with slow but steady steps, leaning on Harold's arm. His briefcase, stuffed with documents, seemed to carry not just papers but the years of silence I was about to break. In the courtroom, Cassandra avoided my gaze. She was dressed plainly. No trace of the extravagance she flaunted online, but the tension in her jaw was unmistakable. The judge, with a stern expression, seated us and opened the session. Harold presented the evidence methodically. First, the bank statements, printed with exact dates, times, and amounts of withdrawals matching the days before her trip. Then, screenshots of her Instagram stories, yachts, designer bags, lavish dinners. Finally, the messages I'd saved, where she responded coldly to my medical emergency or didn't reply at all. Each document was a mirror reflecting who she'd truly been. The judge's brow furrowed with each page Harold handed over when Cassandra tried to cry. The room fell silent. I made no gesture. My coldness was a wall. It wasn't anger, but a final distance her tears couldn't breach. The verdict was clear and unyielding: full repayment of the stolen funds and compensation for emotional damages. A knot formed in my throat, not of joy, but of release. It was the closing of a chapter that had nearly cost me my life. The final blow for Cassandra was swift. Her luxury car and the Airbnb she rented to fund her whims were seized. I watched her lower her head as murmurs filled the room. Her shiny world crumbled before witnesses who wouldn't forget the scene. Outside the courthouse, I took a deep breath. It wasn't victory I felt, but a strange peace that stayed with me as Harold reminded me of remaining legal steps and a future I'd have to shape without looking back. A week after the trial, as my home smelled of calm and freshly baked cake, I found a white envelope in my mailbox. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting from the first curve of the M. I opened it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table, with afternoon light spilling across the wood. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. If you want, we can talk." I read the sentence several times, letting the words flow through my memory like a slow river. I felt no anger. No tears came. A deep sigh left my chest, as if my body finally understood that chapter was closed for me. I held the letter a moment, recalling the hospital, the lonely nights, the constant beeping of monitors. I remembered the glass of water I held after discovering the theft, the quiet resolve that had pushed me to change my life and break the cycle of blindness I'd fed for years. I stood slowly, tucked the letter into my budgeting notebook, where I meticulously tracked every payment received and expense for my new project. There, among numbers and names. That page would remain a record not of debts or money, but of what I no longer chose to carry. I turned on the oven and resumed my routine. I kneaded dough patiently, feeling the soft flour between my fingers, the comforting warmth of my kitchen, the sweet aroma filling the air. My life moved on, free of demands and shouting, held up by my own hands as I placed the cake tray in the oven. I understood that some letters arrived too late, and forgiveness, when given, isn't to go back, but to walk lighter toward what lies ahead. Months passed, and my home was no longer just a refuge, but a new beginning. I turned my living room into a small cafe called Sweet Freedom, a name that felt like mine in every letter. I set up a few wooden tables by the window, with pots of geraniums and the scent of cinnamon in the air. My cakes and muffins became the neighborhood's aroma. Neighbors came every afternoon, some out of curiosity, others by habit. They told me they admired how I hadn't let myself be trampled, how I'd found a way to move forward without fear or resentment. Each word of encouragement was another brick in the quiet strength I'd built for myself. One sunny morning, as I served a child who came with $1 for a slice of lemon cake, my phone buzzed on the counter. Cassandra's name appeared, clear, as if the past were knocking again. I took a deep breath and answered with the calm I'd learned to live with these months. Hello, daughter. If it's for money, I don't have any. If it's for forgiveness, I read your letter. And if it's to start over, you'll have to come as a customer, not an heir. There was silence on the other end. I didn't hang up right away. I waited a few seconds, letting the words settle. Then, gently, I ended the call. I turned to the counter and smiled at the neighbor waiting for his coffee. I poured the steaming liquid into the cup as its warm aroma filled the room. For the first time in a long time, I felt everything in my life was in place, my peace, my work, and the certainty that my heart was no longer anyone's hostage, not even my own blood's. That day, as the street's murmur drifted through the open window, I realized freedom doesn't always come with grand gestures, but in those quiet moments when you pour a coffee and smile without the past weighing you down,